She walked along the dirt road as if crossing a secret desert, carrying the unbearable weight of a destiny she never chose. Expelled by those meant to protect her, she learned to survive in endless silences, each step begging forgiveness for existing. The word infertility clung to her name like dust to skin, turning tenderness into shame and future into endless dark corridors. When her body almost gave up, the orange sky burned like a distant fire, reminding her that even dusk could still warm a broken soul. Then came the creaking sound of a cart, breaking her exile, carrying a tired face and gentle eyes stronger than the evening itself. The farmer did not ask what she lacked. He offered water, bread, and shade, returning her the right to breathe without fear. On the porch stood children, orphans of different stories bound by absence, learning to recognize themselves without words. In their gaze, she saw the same hunger for affection she carried inside, and something hidden moved like embers beneath ashes. In that humble yard, the smell of firewood and coffee whispered another language. Bonds do not need blood to be real. Fate, discreet like the breeze lifting hay, was preparing a miracle. Broken people learning together how to be whole again. The cart stopped at the wooden gate, and the sound of the latch echoed like an ancient sign releasing her toward a new life. The dogs ran first, wagging their tails as if guided by intuition, recognizing the exhaustion of a soul searching for shelter. The porch boards creaked with a rhythm of welcome, each nail telling stories of storms the house had endured with stubborn faith. The farmer opened the door slowly, letting in the twilight, and with it, the fragile possibility of a softer beginning. The children lined up shyly, holding wrinkled notebooks and patched dolls, fragile testaments of survival through hardship. She lowered her eyes, grateful for the water offered, feeling that the liquid washed away insults long glued to her identity. In the kitchen, the kettle sang a familiar hymn, and the smell of baking bread reminded her of Sundays she never lived. Nobody demanded explanations, and that silence was her first cure, because dignity begins when interrogation finally ends. The farmer pointed to a simple room with a window facing the corral, the iron bed sturdier than any promise she had known. The quilt carried stitches from many hands, patches of patience, proof the house itself had learned how to mend its own wounds. As she touched the wooden frame, she heard whispers from the trees, teaching that wind can name pain without turning it into fate. Her first smile was crooked, hesitant, yet real, sprouting like a thin stream breaking through dry earth after a heavy storm. The youngest girl offered her a faded ribbon, a tiny gift small enough for a pocket, but vast enough for a broken heart. She accepted it as one accepts a sacred blessing, sealing an unspoken pact. I see you. You may see me too. Around the table, steaming bowls united strangers like kin, shared hunger turning food into a universal prayer of mercy. The farmer said little, but his eyes told her that here time moved with the harvest, not with the cruelty of condemnations. The lanterns spread a golden glow across the walls, whispering that tonight darkness might ache less than before. When the children cleared the dishes, she offered to wash them, warm water soothing her hands like gentle forgotten caresses. Soap bubbles floated briefly before bursting, each one like an old fear dissolving quietly in the basin of the present. She dried her hands on the apron and met the farmer's gaze, not apologizing for existing. A defiance she had never dared. He nodded firmly, a short gesture carrying weight, acknowledging the value of a step taken on fragile ground. Night arrived with fireflies filling the yard, tiny flames stitching invisible maps back to souls lost along the way. In her room, the rough sheet did not scratch, but instead felt like the texture of an embrace she had never known. Before sleep, she whispered her childhood name to the dark, testing if it still answered, and the silence replied gently. Sleep came slowly, wrapping her in peace, and for the first time in many nights, darkness was not a pit, but a promise of dawn. Morning rose with impatient roosters, and the dew sparkled like thousands of promises waiting for careful hands to guard them. In the kitchen, the smell of filtered coffee drifted like a hymn, lending her memories she never truly owned but now could borrow. Barefoot children entered confidently, as if the earth itself belonged to them, bringing shy smiles that translated into pure hope. She picked up a cloth and dried the dishes, not to repay shelter but to whisper with action, "I long to belong with dignity." The farmer observed quietly, appreciating small labors, knowing healing often starts at the sink before reaching the heart. Outside, sunlight warmed the fences, and the scent of turned hay promised a day that would treat them with measured kindness. The girl with the ribbon proudly showed her the chicken coop, guiding her footsteps so the birds would not scatter in fear. The older boy took her to the well, the rope coarse yet faithful, singing as it rose, reminding her depth can be fountain, not fall. The bucket's weight pulled at her arms, but strength returned, not as violence, but as an ancient right to move the world again. Dust rose in playful swirls, dancing in shafts of light, inviting her to join a rhythm more human than the one she had known. When the bread came out of the oven, they all sat together, the long wooden table embracing them like equal children of need. She chewed slowly, realizing food too is a language, with sentences whispered in butter melting across warm, porous bread. The farmer asked if she wished to stay for a few days. No pressure, only an offering of time, space, and patient air. She answered with a fragile, "I can try." Yet, beneath the weakness lay roots, like seeds saved for a gentler season. The children clapped softly, joy contained, as if aware good things too delicate must be guarded with careful silence. Later, she swept the porch, sweeping fears as well, discovering that external order invites internal calm to settle in. The river's murmur sounded like ancient laughter, while the birds struck hours with rhythms long forgotten by city clocks. The farmer proposed light tasks, not pity, but respect, knowing wounds rushed into service become scars that twist forever. She learned the right weight of a bucket and the sweetness of gentleness, like relearning an instrument abandoned in the attic. At noon, the sun poured down with honest clarity, returning to them in warmth the energy they had offered in patient labor. Laughter, once rare, began to echo on the porch, each child's giggle expanding the inner walls of her fragile chest. That afternoon, she combed the little girl's hair slowly, beginning a ritual declaring, "Here, tenderness has both time and home." The youngest boy showed her a crooked drawing of the house, and there she was, drawn at a window, already part of their world. The rising moon carried the calm of a wide river, shadows no longer threats, but places where rest itself chooses to lie down. In bed, she counted tiny blessings, whispering thanks, realizing tomorrow would find her ready, with steps no longer wandering. By the third sunrise, she woke before the roosters, and that single act declared her courage had finally found a safe address. She lit the stove's flame, blue light etching maps across enamel, paths replacing the dead ends of her past nights. The dough beneath her hands came alive, wheat remembering its destiny to nourish those who dare to remain steadfast. The farmer entered quietly, tipping his hat in respect, acknowledging her presence as something sacred and undeniable. At the table, she placed equal portions for each child, teaching without words that dignity thrives where no one fights for crumbs. The children repeated her name gently, offering kind nicknames, baptizing her into a family she had once thought impossible. Later, they visited the orchard, trees bending with ripe fruit, sweetness dripping like forgiveness into open, grateful hands. She learned to harvest carefully, supporting the stem with her palm, understanding gentleness as both technique and philosophy. Each fruit placed in the basket whispered new beginnings, and her heart echoed back, less heavy, more open to tomorrow. The farmer watched in silence, his eyes carrying gratitude, knowing miracles rarely arrive in storms, but in steady gestures. When she laughed at a child's clumsy fall, the sound startled her, an unfamiliar melody flowing like water from hidden springs. That laugh lingered in the orchard, more precious than the harvest, carrying proof that wounds can blossom into fresh songs. In the afternoon, she mended a torn shirt, her stitches clumsy yet determined, like a spirit relearning how to hold itself together. The boy tried the shirt, proud of her effort, and his smile crowned her work as though she had sewn dignity into fabric. At dusk, she read aloud a children's book, her voice trembling yet steady, turning pages like doors into shared wonderlands. The children leaned closer, absorbing every word, weaving their emptiness with her presence into something whole again. The farmer sat at the doorway, listening in silence, his rough hands folded, knowing words heal in ways toil never can. As the night stretched, the stars appeared brighter, as if the universe approved of broken people building a family anew. Before bed, she kissed the youngest child's forehead, astonished at her own boldness, surprised by the tenderness she had left. That kiss lingered, echoing across the room, proclaiming a truth she had denied: love grows even in soil declared barren. Alone in her room, she stared at the ribbon, now tied around the lamp, glowing faintly as a symbol of a fragile covenant. She touched it softly, whispering that her heart, once discarded, had begun to learn the sacred rhythm of belonging. Outside, the wind sang through the trees, not as lament, but as chorus, blessing the fragile rebirth within those walls. She closed her eyes with a prayer she had forgotten, not for fertility, but for courage to stay, to build, to believe. Sleep came again, gentle and deep, and in her dream she no longer wandered alone. She walked among family, hand in hand. On the fourth morning, the farm awakened with golden light spilling across the fields, like blessings waiting to be gathered. She rose early, carrying baskets to the barn, her steps no longer timid but steady, rooted in the soil she now trusted. The children followed her, laughing, their voices echoing like bells across the open air, dissolving shadows of sorrow. She milked a cow for the first time, clumsy at first, but the animal's patience mirrored the acceptance she had begun to feel. Warm milk streamed into the bucket, and with each drop she felt her heart filling with nourishment she never thought possible. The farmer watched silently from the doorway, his lips curved in the faintest smile, pride disguised as quiet gratitude. She looked up and met his gaze, and in that moment, words were unnecessary. Recognition itself was the language they shared. The children ran with buckets to the kitchen, spilling milk along the way, their joy painting invisible murals on the dirt road. She helped them clean, not scolding, but teaching patience, showing them that mistakes are only lessons in disguise. Together they boiled the milk, and the steam rose like incense, carrying unspoken prayers into the morning air. When she handed cups to the children, their eyes shone as though she had given them more than milk. She had given them family. The farmer joined them at the table, his silence speaking louder than speeches, his presence anchoring the fragile harmony. They ate bread with milk, and the simple meal felt like a feast, binding souls across scars that no longer defined them. Later she swept the barn, singing softly to herself, the melody unfamiliar but born from depths she thought barren. The song caught the children's attention, and they hummed along, weaving their laughter into her hesitant tune. The farmer leaned against the doorframe, listening, his eyes wet with a memory of a wife long gone yet somehow comforted. She stopped suddenly, embarrassed, but the children begged her to continue, their innocence granting her the courage to go on. She sang again, louder this time, her voice trembling but clear, declaring to the walls that brokenness could still produce beauty. When she finished, silence lingered for a heartbeat, then applause erupted, small hands clapping as if they had witnessed a miracle. Her cheeks burned, not from shame but from a joy she had never tasted, as though her soul had finally been invited to the table. That night she prepared supper, slicing vegetables, stirring soups, every motion infused with belonging rather than obligation. The children gathered around, eager to help, and together they turned chores into rituals, work into celebration. At dusk, the farmer set an extra lantern on the table, its glow stretching further, reflecting the expanding warmth of their home. She closed her eyes before bed, hearing echoes of her own song, and realized she had offered them more than survival. She had offered hope. In her dreams, she walked not as an exile, but as a mother, a partner, a woman finally welcomed into life's embrace. By the fifth sunrise, the farm no longer felt like borrowed ground, but like soil that whispered her name with each breeze. She helped mend a fence, hammering nails with determination, her arms sore but her spirit alive with newfound resilience. The children cheered each strike, turning her labor into a performance, their laughter making even splinters feel like trophies. The farmer handed her gloves, his rough hand brushing hers, a simple gesture yet one that carried unspoken trust. Together they lifted heavy beams, side by side, their sweat mixing with dust, stitching a silent partnership between them. She marveled at how work, once a burden, had transformed into proof that she belonged, each strike a declaration of permanence. At noon, they rested under the shade of an oak, the children sprawled across the grass, their giggles mingling with birdsongs. She shared slices of bread, tearing them carefully, and felt as though she was dividing not just food but blessings. The farmer closed his eyes briefly, grateful for the peace that had crept into his land, a peace he thought impossible to restore. When he looked at her, it was not pity but respect, as though he saw in her the same courage he once needed to survive. That afternoon she taught the children to sew, clumsy hands holding needles, laughter filling the air with stitches of joy. She remembered her mother's hands, once stern, and felt the bittersweet ache of giving the children what she had been denied. A boy pricked his finger, and she kissed it gently, instinctively, realizing motherhood can bloom even in barren soil. The children stared at her with awe, as if that small act was a sacred rite, sealing her role among them without doubt. Later, she braided the girl's hair into neat strands, weaving care into every twist, binding herself deeper into their lives. The farmer watched quietly, his chest tightening with emotions he rarely allowed, recognizing the shape of family returning. She looked up and smiled, and the world seemed to pause, holding its breath at the fragile beauty of their shared silence. Evening fell with the scent of rain, and thunder rumbled softly like a drum announcing change rather than fear. She hurried the children inside, lighting candles, turning the storm into a story time instead of a threat. Her voice carried through the house as she read, each word steady, wrapping them in safety that had nothing to do with walls. Lightning flashed, but the children clung to her arms, their trust stronger than any fear that crackled across the sky. She realized in that moment that love had already claimed her, not as a choice, but as an identity she could no longer deny. The farmer sat nearby, listening, his heart swelling with gratitude. The storm outside no match for the calm she had created inside. When the rain finally stopped, the children were asleep, their faces serene, their dreams guarded by the presence they now trusted. Alone in the quiet, she whispered thanks not to fate or family past, but to the miracle of second chances that had found her here. The sixth day dawned with clear skies. The storm washed away, leaving the farm glistening with renewal in every drop. She stepped outside barefoot, the wet grass cool beneath her feet, each step baptizing her into a world that had claimed her. The children followed, splashing puddles, their laughter scattering like birds, rising higher than the morning sun. She twirled playfully with them, her dress damp at the hem, her heart lighter than it had been since childhood. The farmer stood at the doorway watching the scene, his silence filled with reverence for a joy he thought forever lost. Breakfast became a celebration, bread still warm, honey dripping, every bite a chorus of gratitude unspoken yet deeply felt. She taught the children a prayer she once knew, not as obligation but as a song of thanks for air, for bread, for family. Their voices rose together, fragile but harmonious, like threads weaving a tapestry of hope across the wooden table. The farmer bowed his head, not out of ritual but out of awe, recognizing holiness in the ordinary moment unfolding before him. Later, she gathered herbs from the garden, teaching the children how each leaf carried healing, every plant a secret gift. They listened intently, their small hands brushing mint and thyme, learning to respect the wisdom hidden in roots and stems. She prepared teas for their coughs and cuts, her care turning simple leaves into elixirs of tenderness and trust. The children marveled at her knowledge, asking endless questions, their curiosity welcomed instead of silenced. She realized that in teaching them, she was healing herself, reclaiming worth that had been denied but never destroyed. At midday, the farmer joined them under the orchard where apples gleamed, reflecting the sunlight like small miracles. He offered her one, and as she bit into it, juice sweetened her lips. Proof that life can be generous after seasons of loss. The children clapped, cheering as though the apple were a symbol, a promise that sweetness would not abandon them again. In the afternoon, they worked together in the fields, planting seeds with hands careful and hearts wide open. She pressed each seed into the soil gently, whispering a blessing as though sowing not crops but prayers for tomorrow. The farmer watched her, moved by the reverence she gave to every gesture, recognizing that love was reshaping his home. When the day ended, the sky burned crimson, painting the horizon with hope that stretched further than sorrow ever could. Around the fire that night, stories were told, not of pain but of dreams, each voice a thread repairing the tapestry of family. She laughed until tears welled, tears not of grief but of release, water flowing where stones had long damned her spirit. The farmer handed her a blanket, his hand lingering for a second, unspoken promises passing in the warmth of shared silence. As she lay to rest, she realized she was no longer a guest but a root, planted firmly in the soil of a miracle she had once thought impossible. The seventh morning arrived wrapped in mist, the fields breathing softly, as though the earth itself exhaled peace. She stepped outside carrying baskets for laundry, her arms steady, her rhythm no longer that of a guest but of a homemaker. The children followed with excitement, each one eager to help, their joy transforming chores into adventures of belonging. She scrubbed the clothes on the washboard, the rough rhythm echoing like a hymn, each stroke washing away old memories of rejection. The children splashed water, giggling, their innocence turning soap bubbles into floating dreams that burst in laughter. She lifted the wet fabric, heavy yet cleansing, and felt the weight symbolize burdens being rinsed away with every drop. The farmer approached quietly, offering to hang the sheets with her, his presence a silent companion against loneliness. Together they stretched the linens across the line, white sails rising against the sky like banners of quiet victory. The breeze caught the fabric, and it danced with freedom, mirroring the new rhythm beating within her mended heart. The children clapped, proud of the simple task, unaware that they were witnessing the slow weaving of a miracle. She paused to wipe her forehead, and the farmer handed her a cloth, his fingers brushing hers, unspoken tenderness in motion. The sun broke through the mist, lighting their faces, declaring silently that healing had made its home in this household. She looked at the farmer, and he looked back, no words exchanged, only gratitude and recognition of shared survival. That afternoon, she taught the children how to fold the clothes neatly, each crease a lesson in care and respect. The youngest boy laughed at his crooked folds, and she kissed his forehead, transforming imperfection into a badge of love. She remembered her parents' harshness, their voices sharp, and felt relief that her tenderness now rewrote history. The farmer sat nearby, sharpening tools, but his ears lingered on their laughter, each sound chiseling away his solitude. At supper, she placed the folded linens by the fire, pride blooming like wildflowers in corners once barren of joy. The children leaned against her shoulders, their trust so natural that it felt like a crown she had never expected to wear. She whispered a prayer of thanks, not for riches or miracles of flesh, but for the chance to finally matter to someone. The farmer raised his glass of water in quiet acknowledgement, sealing the day with gratitude for a life remade. That night, the linens smelled of sunshine, and as she lay down, the fragrance wrapped her like a promise kept. She closed her eyes and realized that belonging does not arrive in grand gestures, but in small acts repeated daily. Sleep came to her not as escape, but as reward, a deep river carrying her into dreams of family she had once thought forbidden. In that dream, she walked not alone but surrounded, each hand in hers a testimony that love had chosen her again. On the 8th day, the farm buzzed with preparations for market, the air alive with the scent of harvest and anticipation. She packed baskets of vegetables, apples, and jars, her hands moving with confidence, no longer uncertain of her place. The children helped, tying ribbons around jars, their enthusiasm decorating the work with colors of innocence and pride. She guided them with patience, correcting gently, her voice weaving discipline and tenderness into every instruction. The farmer loaded the wagon, glancing at her often, surprised by how naturally she commanded the rhythm of the household. On the way to town, she sat beside him, The children crowded behind, their laughter rattling louder than the wheels. The town square greeted them with noise and bustle, merchants calling, horses neighing, a chaotic symphony of life. She stood tall beside the stand, arranging goods, her presence adding grace to the simple display of farm labor. Townsfolk noticed, whispering about the woman with the orphans, curiosity mixing with admiration in their eyes. She ignored the whispers, her focus on the children, teaching them pride in honest work and the dignity of self-reliance. Customers smiled at her kindness, buying not just produce, but fragments of hope wrapped in her gentle words. The farmer collected coins quietly, but his gaze never strayed far from her, proud yet humbled by her courage. A woman approached, asking if the children were hers, and she answered firmly, "Yes, they are mine in every way that matters." The words startled her, but as she said them, she realized they were truer than any label forced on her before. The children beamed, proud of her declaration, their eyes shining as if she had crowned them with invisible gold. The farmer's chest swelled, not with ownership but with respect, recognizing the bravery it took to claim love as identity. At sunset, they returned with fewer goods and fuller hearts, their laughter echoing louder than the clinking of coins. On the porch, she counted blessings instead of money, marveling at how abundance now lived in smiles, not in sums. The farmer sat beside her, their shoulders brushing, silence filled with warmth that needed no words to be understood. She whispered thanks to the stars, feeling them pulse back as though the heavens themselves honored her truth. That night, she tucked the children in, each one holding a piece of her heart, fragments she offered freely and without fear. The ribbon still hung by her bed, glowing faintly in lamplight, a reminder of the covenant born in innocence. She touched it gently, not as a relic, but as a promise of continuity, of roots deepening into fertile soil. Dreams carried her again, but this time they were not of wandering or exile. They were of home firmly claimed. In those dreams, she stood in the market square, not as a stranger, but as a woman woven fully into family and community. By the 9th sunrise, routine had become ritual, each task no longer survival but sacred ceremony binding their souls. She rose early to light the stove, fire crackling like laughter, filling the kitchen with warmth beyond mere heat. The children entered, yawning, rubbing sleepy eyes, yet smiling because they knew morning now meant comfort and security. She served porridge sweetened with honey, watching them eat, her heart swelling with pride she once thought impossible. The farmer joined, his presence solid, his silence no longer heavy but protective, a shield built of quiet devotion. After breakfast, they headed to the fields, planting seeds together, each hole a small grave transformed into cradle of life. She whispered blessings as she sowed, words of hope buried alongside seeds, prayers that roots would bind them all together. The children mimicked her, their tiny voices echoing, creating a chorus of faith across the furrows of earth. The farmer paused, watching them, struck by how easily she had become the heart of the household he once thought broken. Sweat glistened on her forehead, but instead of shame, it shone like a crown, proof of her worth in this kingdom of soil. At midday, they rested under the oak, sharing bread and cheese, laughter echoing as though sorrow had never existed. She lay back, gazing at clouds, pointing shapes for the children, turning the sky into a canvas of imagination. Their giggles filled the air, and she realized joy was not fleeting. It was now anchored in their shared existence. The farmer offered her water, his hand brushing hers, a spark flickering between them, fragile yet undeniable. She blushed, looking away, but the warmth lingered, not threatening but promising a seed of something tender. That evening she baked pies with the children, their sticky fingers smearing flour like war paint of celebration. They danced around the kitchen, music rising not from instruments but from laughter and the thump of barefoot joy. The farmer entered, pausing in awe, watching the scene unfold like a painting more beautiful than any he could imagine. She looked up, eyes sparkling, and for the first time her smile was full, unguarded, free from the chains of the past. Supper that night was a feast of pies and love, every bite sweetened by gratitude rather than sugar. The children went to bed giggling, bellies full, hearts fuller, their dreams already woven with threads of belonging. She sat by the fire, the ribbon tied to her wrist now, a talisman not of loss, but of redemption and courage. The farmer joined her, silence between them thicker than words, a silence alive with unspoken vows. She whispered softly, "Thank you for letting me stay," and he answered, "No, thank you for coming home." That night, sleep carried her into dreams not of wandering but of planting, roots intertwining with theirs forever. On the 10th day, the farm awoke to crisp air, the kind that clears sorrow and invites courage into every breath. She rose before dawn, preparing breakfast quietly, her movements graceful, like someone born again through routine. The children joined her one by one, sleepy but eager, their laughter spilling like golden light into the kitchen. The farmer entered last, his eyes soft, recognizing how she had transformed silence into sanctuary. They ate together, the table no longer just wood and nails, but an altar where ordinary meals became sacred rituals. After breakfast, she taught the children to read, their voices stumbling through letters, each mistake greeted with patience. She remembered her own childhood lessons, marked by fear and harsh words, and vowed to give these children only gentleness. The boy sounded out a difficult word, and she clapped proudly, turning learning into celebration rather than punishment. The farmer lingered by the doorway, watching her voice sow confidence, his heart swelling with reverence for her gift. In the afternoon, they worked in the fields and she carried baskets of corn, her body stronger with every task. Sweat poured down her face, but instead of shame, she felt triumph, each drop baptizing her into belonging. The children imitated her determination, their tiny arms lifting weeds, proving even little hands could shape the earth. The farmer offered water, their fingers brushing again, the spark now familiar, a fire smoldering with unspoken promises. That evening, she helped mend harnesses in the barn, her clumsy stitches accompanied by the farmer's steady hands. Their shoulders touched as they worked, and the silence was charged, more eloquent than any words they could have spoken. She laughed when her thread tangled, and he chuckled too, their laughter weaving together like rope pulling them closer. The lantern light flickered, casting shadows across their faces, drawing them together in quiet intimacy. The children called from the house and the moment dissolved, but the warmth lingered undeniable, impossible to ignore. Supper was filled with chatter, the children recounting the day, while she listened with a heart swelling with gratitude. The farmer raised his glass once more, honoring not the food but the invisible miracle growing inside their walls. She tucked the children into bed, each goodnight kiss sealing her role, no longer borrowed, but rightfully hers. Alone by the fire, she stared at the ribbon now tied into her hair, glowing as a symbol of promises kept. The farmer sat across from her, silence folding around them like a cloak, heavy with meaning neither dared to voice. When she finally rose, she whispered, "Good night," and he answered softly, "Rest well, you've earned it." That night, her dreams held not exile but future, visions of harvests, laughter, and roots she could never again deny. By the 11th sunrise, her presence felt eternal, as though she had always been carved into the story of the farm. She began the day singing softly, her voice rising with the smoke of the stove, carrying comfort into every corner. The children sang along, their off-key notes turning the morning into a symphony of innocence and joy. The farmer listened from outside, his heart tightening, not with grief, but with gratitude for a home reborn in song. She organized chores with grace, teaching discipline without cruelty, turning obligation into shared purpose. The children obeyed eagerly, not from fear, but from love, their hands small but determined in every task. She milked cows again, steadier this time, her laughter spilling as a calf nudged her clumsily for attention. The farmer laughed too, his rough voice softened, echoing against the barn walls like an old hymn rediscovered. Together they carried milk to the house, their steps in rhythm as though destiny itself had taught them to walk as one. At midday, they picnicked under the oak, bread and fruit laid on a cloth, their circle unbroken, their unity undeniable. She told the children stories from her childhood, not of pain but of dreams, rewriting her past with courage. The children listened, wide-eyed, weaving her words into their imaginations, planting seeds of hope. The farmer lay back on the grass, hands behind his head, watching clouds drift, a rare peace settling into his bones. In the afternoon, she harvested herbs, teaching the children healing secrets, turning knowledge into legacy. They brewed teas, their small hands clumsy, but she guided them gently, transforming mistakes into learning. The house filled with the scent of mint and chamomile, the aroma of care, the fragrance of belonging. That evening, neighbors stopped by, curious about the woman they had seen at market, their eyes watchful yet kind. She welcomed them with warmth, offering bread and tea, her hospitality melting suspicion into respect. The farmer introduced her without hesitation, not as helper but as part of his household, a declaration unspoken but clear. She felt the weight of that introduction, not as burden but as honor, her place now recognized beyond their walls. The children beamed, clinging to her, proud to show her as their mother in all but blood. Supper that night was livelier, laughter shared not just within, but spilling out into the night air. She tucked the children into bed, whispering blessings, each good night sealing a covenant deeper than words. Alone with the farmer, she met his gaze, and though no words were spoken, their silence sang of beginnings. That night, she slept with peace, thicker than dreams, her soul no longer wandering but anchored in family. The 12th morning shimmered with sunlight, the fields alive with promise, each blade of grass singing of abundance. She carried baskets of fruit to the kitchen, her strength sure, her steps no longer hesitant but steady with purpose. The children helped, balancing apples and pears, their laughter rising higher than the birds overhead. She baked pies, the sweet aroma filling the house, a fragrance of love and care stitched into golden crust. The farmer tasted the first slice, closing his eyes as though savoring not just flavor, but the miracle of her presence. The children devoured theirs, sticky fingers reaching for more, joy dripping like honey into every corner of the room. She laughed freely, unguarded, her heart finally unchained from the shackles of shame and rejection. The farmer watched, his chest swelling with admiration. Not for beauty, but for resilience clothed in tenderness. They worked together in the orchard, her hands steady, his guidance gentle, harmony written in sweat and smiles. She reached for a branch, slipped slightly, and he caught her arm, his grip strong, his eyes holding hers longer than usual. Time froze for a breath, and though no words passed, the moment declared truths neither dared to confess aloud. The children teased them innocently, laughter breaking the spell, but both carried the warmth like embers hidden inside. That evening, they prepared a feast, inviting neighbors again, the house alive with chatter and overflowing bowls. She welcomed guests as if born to it, her kindness turning strangers into friends, her grace commanding quiet respect. The farmer introduced her proudly again, this time his tone firmer, as though shaping destiny with his own voice. The neighbors nodded with approval, recognizing what was already evident. She belonged here, with them. The children clung to her skirts, not from fear, but from pride, showing her off as their anchor, their chosen mother. Supper stretched late into night, stories told, songs shared, the walls echoing with more joy than ever before. When the last guest left, the farmer lit an extra lantern, the glow filling shadows with warmth, not loneliness. She stood by the window, looking at stars, whispering thanks, her breath fogging the glass like prayers written in air. The farmer approached, standing close but not touching, their silence brimming with tenderness too vast for speech. She turned, meeting his gaze, and the world stilled, everything else fading beneath the gravity of that connection. He whispered softly, "You've changed this home." And she answered, "This home changed me," sealing the truth between them. That night, sleep carried her into dreams not of exile but of belonging, her soul rooted in a future finally hers. And in those dreams, love bloomed like an orchard, vast, abundant, eternal, impossible to be taken away. On the 13th day, the farm pulsed with life, the air thick with harvest and the certainty of bonds unbreakable. She woke before dawn, lighting lamps, her steps purposeful, as though she carried the weight of a legacy to protect. The children helped set the table, placing bowls and spoons with pride, their joy proof of lessons absorbed deeply. The farmer joined them, his presence grounding the room, silence between them now a symphony of unspoken devotion. Breakfast was laughter and clinking spoons, the simple meal transformed into celebration of survival and love. She tended to the garden, her hands gentle, each touch blessing the soil, each root a symbol of prayers answered. The children watered plants, their small hands guiding streams, learning patience and care from her example. The farmer repaired the barn nearby, glancing often at her, his eyes filled with awe at the miracle unfolding daily. At midday they shared bread beneath the oak, their circle complete, their laughter echoing like hymns. She realized her scars no longer dictated her identity. They had become bridges carrying her into new life. The children nestled against her, each one a heartbeat she now claimed, their love flowing freely into hers. The farmer's hand brushed hers as he passed water, and she did not pull away. Instead, she let warmth linger. That evening, they prepared supper together, chopping vegetables side by side, harmony woven into every slice. The children decorated the table with wildflowers, their innocence blessing the night with beauty unplanned. She laughed as the boy spilled salt, and instead of scolding, she ruffled his hair, teaching forgiveness through touch. The farmer smiled at the scene, his heart no longer a graveyard, but a garden blooming under her presence. Supper stretched with stories, their voices rising, their family identity now unshakable, undeniable, eternal. Afterward, she tucked the children into bed, each kiss sealing love stronger than any bloodline could define. Alone by the fire, she sat beside the farmer, silence once heavy, now sacred, a language only they understood. He whispered, "You belong here." And she answered, "I finally do," words falling like seeds into fertile ground. The fire crackled, sealing their covenant, flames dancing as though celebrating love's quiet triumph. She tied the ribbon tighter in her hair, no longer a relic of pain, but a crown of resilience and hope. That night, sleep embraced her, dreams filled not with wandering but with permanence, roots holding her steady. In those dreams, her children laughed, the farmer smiled, and the farm thrived, all of it drenched in belonging. When dawn broke, it was no longer just a new day. It was the continuation of a miracle born from rejection. She had been cast out for what she could not give, yet she discovered she was chosen for what she could love. Infertility had been her sentence, but on this farm, love rewrote her story with letters carved in tenderness. The children she did not birth became the proof that motherhood is measured not in wombs, but in hearts. The farmer who sought only help found healing, his silence transformed into gratitude and quiet devotion. Together they built a family not by blood but by bonds, stronger than iron, softer than linen in sunlight. The ribbon remained by her side, no longer symbol of abandonment but of the covenant of chosen love. Days turned into weeks, and each sunrise declared her not a guest but a root planted firmly in fertile ground. The laughter of children became her hymn, their trust her crown, their smiles her daily communion. The farmer's gaze no longer carried loneliness, but recognition, as though he had always been waiting for her arrival. Neighbors stopped whispering, for it was clear. This woman belonged here, as vital as soil to seed. She no longer dreamed of acceptance, she lived it, woven into every corner of the farm like threads of light. Love had come not as thunder or storm, but as a quiet dawn, illuminating scars until they became maps of grace. What began in rejection ended in rebirth. A story not of what was lost, but of what was unexpectedly found. She discovered that the truest family is not born of chance, but of choice, of courage, of love without condition. And so the miracle stood unshaken. A woman once discarded had become the heart of a home built on belonging.